There we go. Lord, thank you for this morning. Thanks for some time to be able to just think about you, think about the world, think about what you are at work doing, and pray for just an enjoyable conversation for us to get to know each other better and draw closer to you and be a part of what you're doing in the world. And I pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
But a couple reminders that I wanted to give, just in it being like a 3-week sort of thing, is that like the first week talking about like God's desire to dwell with humanity and pursue a relationship and invite them into the Trinity and just the enjoyment of that and God's desire to do that. Just a reminder that like that is that's God's story and his narrative throughout Scripture, and there's an ending that we're aware of where there's people from every people, tribe, tongue, nation, with God dwelling with Him forever. And because I think it's really easy to be short-sighted, and you look at what's going on around you, and like it's hard to keep that in mind. That like okay, like that's actually like reality, and that's where like the end of the story is, and maybe there's a few chapters that haven't been quite filled in yet, but we know where that story ends, and so logically, like a writer of a book, if he has the ending in mind, that the chapters that aren't filled in yet are going to continue towards that end. And so how do we let our lives like finish towards that end or go in that way instead of getting distracted by like a lot of other things that we could be invested in, like just trying to keep everything in perspective, that like that's the perspective. And so trying to talk about what's going on around the world and unreached people and even unreached people in our communities to have a proper perspective to weigh our decisions and think about what would God have me do, sort of thing. So I thought that was important to remember or remind us of. And just a reminder, this is what we talked about a lot last week, is just the access around the globe that a lot of people don't have. It's over 3 billion people that don't have access to the gospel or would be considered unreached. Because I did want to clarify, because Josh was talking to me a little bit last week about like different people groups that are in the United States, like, and define them as not having access, which was a great question, because I started thinking about it. I was like, okay, well, I guess like defining as not having access probably isn't the right wordage, but they're considered unreached because they fit that definition of having less than 2% evangelical or no active like church or indigenous church planting movement among them. So we have like there's a people group, for instance, in Milwaukee that would fall under the definition of unreached. And I guess in terms of access, like their access to the gospel is higher than maybe their own people in Myanmar, but their access is probably limited to cultural, linguistics, the amount of what's what I'm looking for, like I just can't think of the word, contact that they actually have with Christianity, like even in like a place like Milwaukee, like if they don't speak English, if they can't read and write, whatever, and they don't interact with Christians on a regular basis, then they have more access than like in Myanmar. But for all intents and purposes, like they would still be considered unreached. And so we have people around us in the United States that I think it's a pretty cool opportunity for Americans like who may not be willing or able or for whatever reason go to the far reaches of the world, that there are people that actually are coming here and a little more accessible to reach them and engage with them, which is pretty cool.
So the fields are white for us, and we need to be reaching out.
Yeah, there's a tension there between like, and I talked about it last week, with like understanding that as America we have finite resources, and so like immigration is like a concern for people, and I get that. And so how do you weigh that with the reality of like, well, there are people that are here, how do we engage them because they are here, and everything. So it's probably a pretty nuanced conversation to have, but I don't think people always realize that like that is the reality of like, oh man, like it's not just Mexicans coming to our country, or Europeans or whatever. It's like actually unreached people are being sent to our country because they're being murdered by whoever or pushed to the brink of survival or existence in different countries, and they're coming to America. And it's like, okay, like can we offer them a better life, but also like eternal life, because they're here and you can't go be a missionary in a place like Myanmar. But here, there's you can't go, you have to be creative and think about how do I get access to a certain country. Like you may not be able to go and specifically, it's illegal to tell them about Jesus. But America here, you have much more freedom, at least right now, to be able to do those things. So yeah, it is a interesting opportunity. So then, today I wanted to talk about I have a couple different missionaries that I reached out to connect with. I asked them 3 questions. I asked them, where do they serve? And I'll have to kind of stop and start the recording a little bit because some of them live in some different sensitive areas. I asked them, what challenges do they face in their particular areas where they serve? And then what does it take, or what does it look like to actually reach unreached people? So that's kind of what we'll do today, and then I have some other practical ways that you can be involved or interested in that. So in a different way, I figured I'd talk about us first. Serving here at EBI Waukesha as the ground floor, pretty basic, introducing students to unreached people, helping them with Bible training, discipling them in their very young walks with the Lord, and what it so it's challenges that we face. It's challenging for us to be away from our family. It's challenging for us, even though we're in the States. My dad had a stroke a couple months ago, and it's I can't just have lunch with him once a week, or my parents' faith is not doing well. I can't just go hang out with them and encourage them. So being away from family is difficult. Living off financial support isn't the most lucrative or easiest. Figure out how do you, budgeting. I forget about it's different every month. So surviving, and the Lord takes care of you, but you kind of even on a stateside missionary, it's you kind of balancing trusting the Lord and kind of just we were talking about, trusting the Lord in wisdom,
right.
Figuring all those things out, putting them all in there. If just because I trust God doesn't mean it's going to work out the way I think it's going to work out. And here everything is going great. I can trust God, and it doesn't work out. So those things are difficult. We went through missionary training, and what does it take to reach an unreached? It's very interesting. You see God throughout Scripture use the foolish and weak things of the world. So I think at a baseline level, we're all kind of the fools, right? We're in the world's economy, we're the fool. We're all weak if we're really honest about it. We have some things that God's given us and gifted us with, created us with, that we can offer and use and steward. But He uses the weak things of the world to shame the wise, right? So there's that, and then the reality of some of the 18, 19, 20-year-old guys that I work with, it's whoa, to live in some of these places takes a certain kind of person, a certain amount of maturity, a certain amount of understanding your inadequacy, your reliance on the Lord, a certain amount of tact, a certain amount of ingenuity, a certain amount of determination, and I think that we're seeing is it's not to pick on culture, because Gen Z has good things about it too, but that 18, 19, 20-year-old guys are coming in, maybe not at a spot where maybe 20 years ago 18, 19, 20-year-old guys were at. So what does it take to reach the unreached? It takes maybe more time to prepare for that than it used to. It's great getting to work with these students and stuff, but I think we are realizing the amount of technology they have access to, the amount of connections they have socially, that to go and live in the middle of nowhere, or go and live in Vietnam and not be posting on your social media, there's just a lot of potential obstacles to becoming the sort of person that could trust the Lord and be content with a lot of uncomfortability over there. So those are, some of our specific things that we've thought about or worked through. This next couple, I don't have their names up there because they work in an area of the world that's pretty have lots of security concerns or whatever. But they're good friends of mine. I've known them for 14 years now, and they work in Southeast Asia. So that's what I can say. They work in Southeast Asia, and they've been there for, let's say, 7-8 years, something like that. Gotta be something like that. And like to reach an unreached people group in a place like that, like I think for a lot of ethnos people or like do tribes, you think about, I go to this people group, I learn their language, I learn their culture, I sit them down for 6 weeks, I teach them, this teaching. We have a new church, we disciple them, we translate the Bible, and like over time we appoint elders, and then like here we go. And a lot of the places, so in Southeast Asia, like they're in the 1040 window, that like which I'll talk about in a minute, like creative access getting into the country, like it's not really plausible all the time to do it that way, and so it looks a lot different, which I'll kind of explain here in a minute. But excuse me, challenges they face. There's obviously hostility towards foreigners doing public ministry. Even commenting that like there's persecution of like the Christian citizens like in the country itself, being put in prison, even the national Christians of the country, which there are some. And then staying in the country long term is really, really difficult. Getting a long term visa that isn't just you can, some of these countries you can get like a student visa, and that can get you a little bit, or a tourist visa that can get you a little bit. But having a reason to be there long term. I was actually talking. We have a student from India, and I was interested in like, is India like hostile towards Christianity? Is it indifferent? Whatever. He's like, well, the government's kind of indifferent to it. Their big thing is like you can't come as a missionary because like you're living, like Westerners will come here and live opulent lifestyles, and they're saying like if you're going to come here, have something like work with Indians, have a business, a job, whatever, you're contributing to the Indian economy. And if you're doing that, like they seem to be a little bit indifferent. Now there's probably different areas in India that would kind of depend. That was kind of his perspective of like you can go, and it's not all these areas in the 1040 window are super hostile towards Christianity, but like a long-term visa and having a reason to be there, contributing to the local economy, being a part of the country, is probably different than the mindset of 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago where you just pop in and I just need to tell these people about Jesus. And it's like, maybe some of these countries, if you need to show some amount of care and respect towards them as a government and as a country, and you have some open doors if you go that way. So what he said about daily life being more inconvenient, I mean, it's way less developed than other areas. So travel, distances, transportation is just adds time and energy and income. And he said so because of that, there's many missionaries that feel depressed or anxious or overwhelmed by ministry and daily life, because ministry challenges are one thing, and then daily life is more involved than it would be in more developed areas, and so it just can be really taxing for people. What does it take to reach an unreached people group? From his perspective, where he's at, in that area of the world, I think him and his wife are experiencing some of the effects of globalization and like people moving around a lot. Like I don't know if you've noticed any changes from like your generation to now this generation, but every time people walk around the dorms on the second floor over at the school, and the amount of technology that these guys have just on their desk is like unfathomable. Like when I went to Bible college, which was only like 13 or 14 years ago, like we had none of this stuff, or at least the money for this kind of stuff, let alone the fact that like people are traveling the globe regularly, much more frequently than maybe 50, 60 years ago, that you have people in different people groups coming to some capital cities, and maybe the people groups still have certain cultural identities, but the people are mixing a lot more. So you're seeing that happen right now, which again looks different than I go to this people group, I learn their language, I teach them. Like, if they're all like mixed up, and like how do you effectively reach? Like, do you find a common language that they all would speak in common, and decide to go that route? Do you learn these people's specific languages? So like he said specifically for their situation, learning like that tribal language of this people is something that's very important and significant. But that's not so that you could either, it's taxing to have to learn two languages, so you learn a national language and then a second language, or you have to strategize and figure out like there's this melting pot here of people. Like, what is the best strategy? What makes the most sense to actually reach this region of the world? It takes
the Holy Spirit's like Pentecost, It
takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of energy. It takes okay, this is not like, so contrary to popular opinion, missionaries do work, but it's a lot of like just what is it going to take to this area of the world? What makes the most sense? What's going on in history and in the world? Maybe God's bringing people from different places. How do we reach them? So then we had like the situation in Vietnam, which again is not where these people are. You cannot, like, Westerners cannot go out into local tribes or whatever. But in the capital city of Hanoi, you have a lot of people coming to Hanoi from those different people groups, and so it's like the strategies and stuff just looks like what can you do in different parts of the world like this. Translation, again, like, what do people read and write in? Are there other options for those that are illiterate? Like, do you have to teach literacy to certain people? The oral Bible, like, is that something that could work? Like, what are the best ways? It's just like a lot of different strategies, like what does a church plant look like in settings and situations like these is more difficult to pinpoint exactly. It's not a one-size-fit-all. So that's some challenges that for them and what it takes to reach unreached people in different areas of the world. And if you're interested in connecting with them or anything like that, I can give you their personal information, off-site or anything. But the next family I have, they're on Facebook and they share about it, but I don't really know if, I should just say they work in the Amazon.
Do what's comfortable for you.
Amazon region. And these are actually, so like Felicia's brother, so Felicia's sister-in-law, her brother's wife, her older sister, this is her and her husband. So they're like kind of family. So Felicia's known them for years, my wife. And so what they do is they do their church planting. They do church planting and they do training and mobilizing indigenous leaders. And these indigenous leaders are primarily from the Amazon. So they spend a ton of time in the jungle and they spend a ton of time on the river. Honestly, I see some of these guys' updates and like, I'm like, now my health pretty much takes me off the field of any of these things. But I'm like, even if so, like, you guys are crazy. They've got 4 boys, and I think they just had a baby girl. I think so. They've got 5 kids, and it's like you guys are nuts for what they do. Honestly, but again, it takes certain people to do certain things, and God has gifted them in a sort of way where they are really thriving and being used by God and content with where God has them and stuff. But it's really crazy. So different challenges they face, logistics for them, like living where they live in the Amazon, working in the jungle is just like a whole other animal. Like they're building a house for themselves, and like they have to basically boat in materials and stuff for like the construction of this house, and so logistically that looks crazy. traveling days on the river, crossing rapids, so they would have to drag their boats, kind of around the rapids and stuff. So they just had malaria a couple weeks or months ago, and so he had to go by boat. Like, he has malaria and he has to go by boat to go get malaria meds and stuff. So it's not just going to the local pharmacy. They just got to hop in the river and travel there, which, so hiking long trails at heavy loads, food, hunting, fishing, like, is all. This would be more in line with, like, maybe traditionally what we see or know about, like, missions and tribal locations. Like, you go and you just live amongst those people, and life is very inconvenient. So that's some of that's the logistical challenge they face. Cultural and with linguistics, there's 26 languages in that region of the jungle where they work. And he said any given village can speak 4 to 8 of those languages. So again, it's like, okay, we're church planting. What, like, is there any common denominator here? Because so the country or region as a whole would be, like, their national language would be Spanish, but some of these people living in, deep in some of these places, like, you might have some people that know Spanish, or you might have some people who have never been to any of the higher populated areas of these countries, and, like, they don't speak Spanish much at all. So they speak anywhere from 4 to 8 languages. So what do you translate in? What do you teach in? What do you disciple in? Like, what languages as a person do you learn? Like, can a 35-year-old learn 8 languages? Probably not. Like, so what do you learn? Trying to reach people. He said culturally wise, like, I think he understands, like, American people can be uninterested in the gospel, but I think he is almost seeing, like, a different almost level of that, like, just disinterest and indifference to people living out there to the gospel. So, like, they're out there doing this work, and people are just like, yeah, whatever. Like, so it becomes like, so they're working, in their minds, they're giving up quite a lot for people that may not be interested in it, and it's, you're weighing sacrifice and, like, disinterest, and, like, it's hard to see, like, the worth in it all sometimes. So that's a challenge that they face. So then when I asked them, like, for them, what does it look like to reach the unreached, or, reach people like that, he says, it takes, like, an unmovable commitment to Christ, like, because you're going to face those days and those weeks where, like I'm sure, or at least I would be, if I'm sitting on a boat in the Amazon going to get malaria medication, I'm probably seriously questioning my choices, and, like, getting to this spot, like, okay, this is just daily life, and getting used to that. He said a ridiculous amount of flexibility, like, you just have to be ridiculously flexible. Things are not going to be on your timeline, especially living in Latin America, like, or really anywhere in the less developed world. They do not function how we function, and so having a lot of flexibility and being comfortable with constant discomfort is what it's going to take to reach people in different areas of the world like this. And then a willingness to recognize that God rarely does things my way. That's what he said. And I think they just had to, that's the reality. And I think God's really grown them and gifted them in a certain way that, like, we have, like, grown to, like, learn. Like, it's kind of like, you're climbing to the top of the mountain, and once you're up there, it's like they're at that point. I'm sure they still struggle, but it's probably not as much like fighting God on the discomfort as more as it is just, it is what it is, and we're content and trusting Him anyway. So, yeah, that's some of our friends living in the Amazon. And then the last one I have is a little more traditional. I'm these ones I'm good with. But these people living in Papua New Guinea. So a little more traditional ethnos, new tribes, like moving into a people group, learning their language, learning their culture, teaching, establishing a church, raising up elders, like that process that I'm, familiar with from several people that I know. This is, life in PNG. Their last names are the Cheese Gels, and they are, like, Felicia knows them, they're like friends of friends living over there. But I picked them specifically because they have a very interesting situation. But I have another friend who's living in PNG who I asked some of these questions to. He's like a flight coordinator because, Papua New Guinea, you can go and be a missionary legally. And so they have a lot of infrastructure there. Like they have a lot of aircraft where they fly supplies in and out of these different areas that are super isolated. So there's a lot more infrastructure, a lot more structure. And so I was asking him, like, what kind of challenges, the field, Papua New Guinea people over there, what do they face? He said, again, raising support, but like over there, I think he said for a family of 5, their budget is like almost $10,000 a month to live over there. But some of that includes like paperwork, visas, working with the government. So like they've had, my buddy specifically has 3 kids, and in Papua New Guinea, you definitely they don't have the health care to have a kid. We had some other friends who they weren't sure if they were miscarrying, and like they basically said like you need to go back to the States because if that is the case, like we don't have the requisite health care. So you can either have a kid in Australia or in the United States, and it's basically the same cost. So most of them opt to have in the United States with their family, and but then you have to apply for a visa and to get back in, and a passport for your new baby, and so it's a lot of paperwork and stuff to sort through in order to get over to not just this country but other places too, which we've talked about. You have a question?
No, I'm
Okay,
just
okay.
thinking about what you're saying.
Okay. Travel takes a while. It's expensive. If you're going to, so my friends going to the Amazon, the flight's short, the river travel takes long. If you're going to Papua New Guinea, it's like literally all the way across the world, and so it takes, I think, like 3 days of travel to get over there. So that's usually they fly. You can fly from here in the States to LAX, then you can fly LAX to Australia, and then Australia to Papua New Guinea, and then typically from like the capital city to where they need to go in Papua New Guinea. So it's looking at like 4 or 5 flights just to get back to that place. So that's expensive, takes a while. Just imagine.
How long have they been there?
These people specifically, I think have been there probably a dozen years or so.
Okay.
Not specifically in the people group, but in terms of being in country, learning national language, going through some of those things. I think about a dozen years. Access to medical, which I've already said, but definitely in that country, like Papua New Guinea, is very low developed. So they don't have a ton of great access to medical care. Felicia and I looked into it when we were going through training with My Health. They have a doctor on field actually with the mission, but that's more for like malaria, stomach stuff, cold, whatever. Like, so I would have had to, if we lived on that field, I would have had to have a GI doctor in Australia. I would have had to fly out to Australia at least once a year to go see him. And if I had, because I have Crohn's disease, which I haven't said, but if I, like any regular colonoscopies, I have to fly out to Australia. They'd have to ship my meds in from Australia. And so you're talking just an astronomical amount of money to live there because they just don't have the medical needs if you're not a healthy person over there. Or relatively healthy. Specifically for these people, in working in a people group, challenges they face. The animism over there is just off the charts, the folk religion and just spirit world, which I think probably in the West in America we could benefit to be a little more sensitive to. But they're like hypersensitive, where they have spirits of everything, and so you really have to spend a lot of time learning culture and where these people are coming from, because very easily God could just become another spirit. Like God is, the God of the Bible is just one more of many that they have. So you really have to do your homework and do a lot of things so that when they teach through the scripture and teach through the story of God, he's not just another God. And that's the thing, most people groups around the country, around the world that you find, they're all going to have a creation story. Like, a people group that's religious in any sort of way, fashion, is going to have a creation story, like how this world came into being. And so they're used to having a God who created, or a spirit who created something. And so if you introduce the story of, God creating the world, very easily could just give a name and a story to the story that they already know, a different kind, and you really have to do your homework to make sure that, like, that their story is being replaced by God's story and not just being kind of added to.
Assimilated into it.
So that's a challenge that they face for sure. Again, not just here, but in other places. But learning an oral language and teaching literacy and stuff is another tricky one. So like we went through training and we went through a phonetics class where we're learning the phonetic alphabet and different symbols that go with certain sounds. And so you got your recorder and you're sitting there with your recorder and they're saying something and you're trying to repeat it and say it like they're saying it, but then like you're trying to create an alphabet based off the sounds that you're hearing in this language so that you can eventually translate the Bible, but not every language has 26 letters in it. It might have more, it might have less. So that takes a lot of work. We did a class on discourse analysis where we have ways we tell things, like tell stories. So like Americans have ways we tell stories. We transition to things through first, second, lastly, after this, before that, next, like all sorts of things we learned in English class. Well, so other people groups do too. So if you're going to tell a story, if you're just going to be a normal part of a culture and tell a story, my kids did this dumb thing this morning, or if you're going to tell a story like Jesus came and did this, like you have to tell it in a way that they tell stories, and so it takes a lot of work. It's not, you can't buy Rosetta Stone and upload it and figure out how do these people talk and communicate and discuss with each other about things. You have to learn it all orally, and then eventually teach these people how to read and write so that they can read God's word on their own when the translation is done. So that takes a lot of work. This particular this couple, I really appreciate his honesty and vulnerability. He's a really solid guy. They're in a people group right now, teaching on their own. They don't have anybody. They don't have teammates or anything right now. So they're teaching through the chronological teaching. They just started maybe 6-8 weeks ago or something like that. Sometime this summer. And so like translation, like he's doing it on his own, like preparing lessons, it's just him. And he's teaching another language. So basically you have to like write out what you're saying, so you get exactly what you're trying to say. You don't really want to ad-lib to people who, are underreached and have no idea what you're talking about. Right. So it's weighing on them a lot. So actually his most recent Facebook post, he was talking about like the reality of that right now, and like his daughter coming up and like asking his dad to play Candyland, and he's like, I have to go back to the office, and like he's like, I know that doesn't honor God for me to like just tell my kids no, but also like there's nobody else here, and like they're really feeling the tension of like, what do we do, because we're the only ones here, and these people need to know about Jesus, but also my kids need to know that I care about them too. And so that's a challenge that they're facing, and I think they have some vacation come up in a couple of weeks where they're going to come out for a week and spend time as a family and stuff. But that's a real like challenge where you reach an unreached people group and you're on your own, like there are no other Americans, and that is life. So you can be praying for them. What does it take to reach the unreached? From their perspective, a massive team of support. Again, uncomfortability, which seems like a theme throughout all of these people. Loneliness, a willingness to suffer. A lot of qualities that again, that are hard to teach. You're trying to build character and faith in the hopes that when they reach certain obstacles, they become a certain type of person who can trust the Lord and have certain character qualities that they're a little more stable. So those are some of those friends of ours. Just to finish up, just trying to think of some practical ways about like how you guys can be involved, or people listening online who weren't here this week, how you can be involved, like, because the reality is, like, are any of us gonna like go to the middle of nowhere and live there? Like probably not. Like my health, I can't do it unless the Lord decides to do something crazy there. I'm not able to. Mm-hmm. But there are ways that like we can be involved. Like number one, like you can pray. Like, you can absolutely pray. I think I myself sometimes, a lot of us, we underestimate prayer and the power of it, and just bringing people before the Lord and situations before the Lord. Like we can pray. for missionaries, and we can pray for the unreached. Like, we can pray for those people. There's a website called the Joshua Project that has a daily unreached people group that you can pray for that people group every single day. It's just a new people group. You can pray for them. Financial support, like every missionary family lives off of financial support. So, I'm sure there are people that any of the people that I talked about, if you're interested in anything like that, like I can get you connected with them. But financial support is really, how these people live. Lifestyle, like personally for us, like do we live in a sort of way that reflects like the needs around the world? Like, like I have somebody I know, which I'm not picking or anything. It's more interesting. But like he hit on the big GameStop drop in stock, like, was that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. Yeah. And he used the money, went out and bought a Tesla. And it's like, okay, like I'm not like judging or anything, but like, are there ways we could use our finances in a little bit different way that reflect the fact that like,
you're supporting.
There's other things that maybe are higher priorities. Not even necessarily like, hey, I got to give this missionary, but like, can you steward your finances or your life in a certain way, your time, your resources that reflect, God's priorities in a different way. Again, it's kind of like more a principle and not like a black and white. You have to do this, do this, do this. But it's just like my lifestyle doesn't reflect the fact, do I have margin in my finances to actually be generous to people. Visiting missionaries overseas, like that's really impactful. I think many of us missionaries, ourselves included, even in the States, like really benefit from seeing familiar, friendly faces. And so if it's possible or reasonable at all to go and visit missionaries overseas, I think it's a big shot in the arm for missionaries. Corresponding with missionaries, if you get any newsletters like from missionaries, writing them back, interacting with their material, asking them questions, asking how you could be praying for them, I think is a really big encouragement. I think we send out a newsletter, and I think a lot of people read it, or maybe don't read it. But the amount of like interaction we get is a very small percentage, and so it's one thing to hear that you're supported, and it's another thing to know for sure like these people actually are engaged in what we're doing. Housing for missionaries, like missionaries come home and they might not have a place to live. Vehicle usage. There's a guy out in Pennsylvania who's a mechanic, and he bought a van, gives it to a missionary while they're on home assignment, sells it, puts the money back in the pot afterwards. So like vehicle usage for missionaries when they're back, they might not have something to drive. Getting involved with the local ministry. So I have one main idea, but a couple other suggestions. But in Milwaukee, which might not be for everybody, but there's an international community center where they offer like citizenship classes. They offer tutoring for different refugees or immigrants, whatever, trying to get citizenship, right in Milwaukee. And so you can, like I think it's Wednesday nights, they offer tutoring classes. You can go there and tutor middle and high school age kids that are unreached people, some of them. They have classes for citizenship that you could go help out with, like people that are immigrants trying to become citizens. You can go that. So yeah, that's the International Community Center in Milwaukee. There are different refugee organizations in Milwaukee and in Madison that if that's something that piques your interest, is there, like I can get that contact information for you. But there are different organizations. Like if you're interested in connecting with some of these people groups that are coming into the States, there are some specific organizations that help with the resettlement of those people. And then there's hosting international students like UW Whitewater. I don't know where you guys live, but UW Whitewater is about a half hour down the road, I saw. Waukesha, there's Carroll University, there's UW Milwaukee. If you're closer to Madison, there's UW Madison, obviously. But there's over like 10,000 international students just in the UW system. And I actually looked up, like there's a phone number you can call to connect with someone who does support for international students at those campuses. So UW Whitewater, you can look up, you can call that number, say, hey, do you need any help with hosting international students? Which they might be believers, they might not. Like you don't know, but that's another way, like to get involved in a local ministry or local outreach to some of these people coming into the country. There's some feasible things, or financial support if that's more reasonable than connecting personally. Some of these organizations you can support financially doing these things. going overseas, like you go visit missionaries. We have, through Ethnos 360, we have encounter trips that we run every summer that are like short 2-week trips to different fields that Ethnos specifically works with. And I talk to our mobilization guy, like those are open to people in the public in our local churches. I have some pamphlets there. Here. But they go to different parts around the world. So like if you're interested in going overseas and just seeing a field for yourself, just to better know how to pray, better know how to give, whatever, I have some of those some of that information to for those encounter trips. And then let's see, anything else on that one? I don't think. Oh yeah, I was going to mention there's Whitestones partnerships in Africa and in Jamaica that they have trips that they run pretty frequently to go down and care for people, build some simple structures, support some of the conferences and discipleship stuff going on in Africa. So those are opportunities you could go onto those fields and see those ministries for yourself that Whitestone partners with, and then lastly, you could continue your education. So in January, there's a Perspectives course, which I've taken before, that's starting in Pewaukee. It looks like there's a church or organization called World Impact Ministries, and they're in Pewaukee. And on Monday nights in January, they're going to be starting a 15-week class about it's called Perspectives, God's Global Mission, I think is what the tagline is. I forget. I don't know, Perspectives on the... I can't remember the tagline. But it's a really interesting course. If you're interested in like talking about this more or learning about this more, they bring in teachers, former missionaries from all over the country to speak. So you're going to have people from Papua New Guinea, South America, the Middle East, come and share about the World Christian Movement. That's what it is. Perspectives and what God's doing around the world. So that's an opportunity you can do as well. Which, if you want that information online, if you're listening online, you can talk to Josh Watson or myself, and we can get you that information. Or you can contact Jack Benjamin. Yeah, is there any questions? Services is just about out, I think. But
I'm curious though. Like with all those people all over the world, I know like when we did missionary work, we only could drink water bottle. Who do they like all those missionaries like in because I'm sure their water isn't the greatest in those other countries. So what do they do with that? Do they filter the water or what?
Yeah, so like in the jungle in like Papua New Guinea, they would have like either a cistern or like a water tower where they would collect rainwater.
Okay.
And then they would have like our mission. That's where like the infrastructure in Papua New Guinea in some places is much stronger, where we actually have like a tech section of our organization that develops like water filtration and solar panel systems. Like if you're going to go move into a people group, you give them latitude, longitude, and they'll pop those numbers in their computer and design like a solar panel system for where you're going to be living. And they do the same thing with water filtration. Like if you're living in a major city around the world, the odds are that those people don't like drinking unfiltered water either. So like when I was living in Tijuana, Mexico, which you can comment, I'm curious what India, but when I was living in Tijuana, Mexico, nobody drank the tap water either. Like no one wanted to do that. So they had places that had water filtration. You bring your big blue igloos, you get them all refilled, and that's what you can use to drink and cook with. Showering doesn't matter so much.
I know, because I was going to say we were drinking bottled water, but it was like a lot of it, you can get pesticides, and stuff. And so we were told not to touch, not even to take ice if we went into town, because we were first up in the jungle, but then we came down. And they said don't put ice in there because that could... Actually, a girl did get sick, though. Yeah, because she ate something she shouldn't have. But the thing is, I just always wonder, because water is something you need, So I wonder if they did filter it, if they had something that filters.
There's a lot of new development in the, I would say technology, but with filters and straws and stuff where it's amazing what you can...
Really do.
What you can filter. And there's also some measures where if you're going there to live, then you learn what do we need to do to set up and because I'll be staying here for a while, and whether it be with a cistern or whatever,
Right.
Because when you're there for 3 weeks or something, same thing when we had teams come over, just drink bottled water. You're
Yeah.
here for such a short time.
Right.
Your stomach's not used to anything
Right.
besides this. It's
Right.
no point in even trying to drink because you think in your mind, well, I want to be like the people here,
right.
and then you get sick and your
You're
whole
used to
trip
it,
is.
yeah.
So you take much higher precautions when you're there for a short time. But if you're living there,
That's
Okay.
a question for ethnos. Do they teach like some of those skills about filtering water? How
Oh,
to?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
that's
we were
what I was-
so
at our
practical
missionary-
living
When
skills.
we were at our missionary training, we had a course. It was tech. That wasn't tech skills. I don't know what it was. But it was. You can get whatever you need to get. So we had like a course for 3 weeks or so about some of those things where like we would practice DC wiring and stuff because that's
Yeah.
what you're going to have off the solar panel, and here's some different water filtration options and stuff. But basically, like, if you're an ethnos and you're going to go live in a place like this where you need those things, it's pretty much part and parcel of like you don't really have the option of moving to a place like that and not having that be part of the conversation. It's already part of the deal. It's because we're so established in some of those places that's
Okay.
kind of built into the infrastructure of even allocating to a place like that. It's not just I move out there, it's a whole process in getting out there. Now again, if you live in a major city like Tijuana, I'd pull up in my truck with a bunch of blue refills, and the literal store sells filtered water. And I'm 100% positive that you're going to have people, it's Cairo, Egypt, or Baghdad, like these places are going to have filtered
these are
water
developed places,
Those
so-
will be developed cities, yeah. But if you're out other places, you're going to have to. But again,
that's
you can
what I
buy
was
Amazon
wondering, though.
little survival straws. You can grab some water
I
from the
didn't
Amazon
think of
River.
that.
You got your survival straw. It filters out. Like they have so much now
Yeah.
to be able to do
I guess.
that way.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, at campers, I mean, you used to put chlorine tablets in your camp water here. I mean, if you got water from the river here, so
And it's just a reminder, like, again, from what I said at the beginning, like, God's story is this, God, us
Right.
dwelling with God forever, and so how do we, align our lives to fit into what He's doing rather than just being
Yeah.
distracted or going about our own business.
but you can't go into it naively to be a missionary. I mean, you can't say, "Well, God's just going to take care of me." I mean, yes, He is, but there are practical things you need to do. Like the water thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of.
Yep.
I'm glad you guys don't ignore that. I mean,
No.
I mean,
Again, 60, 70 years ago, we may have. I think there was definitely that World War II generation was like, let's just go do it.
Yeah.
Which, so like you got guys like Jim Elliott, which great, like amazing for them, but they're really cool examples of like people who understood somewhat of the risk and it just didn't matter.
yeah.
But I think
yeah.
now we're like, okay, how do you balance the two out? Maybe we just know a little bit more. I don't know. But you have people who like, you have people on different ends of the spectrum, like how I need to risk more. I need to be willing to be more uncomfortable, and then some people are like, hey, you need a little bit more wisdom.